It's really exciting when you come from an industry like where I started my career. Some of you may know my career didn't start in high tech. My career started with in agriculture. I was born and raised in a little town called Clovis, right outside of Fresno. Anybody know Clovis? Yeah, woo! You guys know my little hometown. I'm not sure if I heard that, but oh, okay. We in our little town, we have pride in our raisins. We stand up straight for raisins. And you remember those little raisin guys? Yeah. I was part of that little scene. It was a great scene. And being in agriculture and working for Del Monte, one of the things that we were really prideful of, because we were prideful of the brands that we had, was the product line. And my product line was raisins, dried fruit. I'm a Central Valley guy. And the one thing that we aspired to be at Del Monte is to go beyond dried fruit and make it to tomatoes. You guys laugh. It's true. It's one of those things where, like, gosh, if you really make it, you make it in tomatoes. So fast forward several years, beyond my time as being a CIO, I'm at a conference, and I hear this guy speaking. He's talking about Morningstar. And when I think about Morningstar, I don't know if you guys are in finance, but for me, Morningstar meant like the financial news, right? Where you can actually do financial analysis. Morningstar is out there. And I'm like, oh, great. I get to learn a little bit about that company. And sure enough, it wasn't about the financial company. It's about Morningstar tomatoes. And I'm like, this is really interesting. I think I remember that company. And I remember looking at that company, thinking about what changes they're making in the industry. And I really didn't tune into how Morningstar was one of those companies that was making change happen before all of us were even talking about Agile. It's about making process change and cultural change all at the same time to really create a new environment for their staff and their company. Well, lo and behold, that person was and is Doug Kirkpatrick, who had me kind of think about culture in a new way. And it's really helped me pause and think, if this mindset can happen at a company that processes tomatoes, where else can it be effective? And with that in mind, we've been able to apply Agile to other industries, from winemaking to education to even casinos. Much different from what most people think about Agile. So with that, I'd like to introduce to you Doug Kirkpatrick, who's a TEDx speaker and principal of NuFocus. Come on up.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you. If you know what this is, raise your hand. How many people, not seeing a lot of hands go up. Okay. Well, this is, if you guessed intellectually that this was two bent lines, you'd be absolutely correct. But it's actually a little bit more than that. So these two bent lines represent something very special. And when these two bent lines are packed with the right genetic material, the right DNA, they form the entire genetic structure of a fern. And interestingly, wherever you look in a fern, whether it's in a small leaf or a larger frond or a whole forest, you'll see the same two bent lines. So it's called a fractal. And there are lots of examples in nature of very simple structures that allow very rich and diverse expression and growth. And whether that fern becomes a single leaf or a frond or an entire forest primeval of ferns depends on its ecosystem. It depends on the degree of sunlight, the moisture in the soil, the nutrients that the roots can access. And it's a little bit the same with human organizations, with human ecosystems. And so these lessons from nature ask some very fundamental questions of us as leaders of organizations. Can we create organizations that are based on very simple principles that allow us to do extraordinarily complex things? Can we create organizations where everyone is able to express themselves fully and bring their entire selves to work? Can we create organizations where everyone has a voice in matters that affect them? Can we create organizations where leadership and innovation can spring forth from any point at any time? I'll give you another example. Let's play the video here. Does anyone know what this is? Very famous Nobel laureate Ilya Prigozhin, born in Moscow, worked in Brussels, Nobel Prize winner, figured out that if you add two clear substances together that are completely disparate and diverse, they can collaborate together in a way that's so powerful and precise that you can actually create what he called a chemical clock of absolute precision. So this asks another question of us as organizational leaders. Can we mix diverse viewpoints, diverse individuals together and have them collaborate together in ways that are powerful and precise? I think we can. So the example that I have is that in the spring of 1990, there was a tiny group of colleagues working together in a little farmhouse about 50 miles straight east of here, near a town called Los Banos, California. And this little team had come together. They'd been pulled together by an entrepreneur named Chris Roofer, and they were working on a project called Morningstar. And their mission was to build and operate a state-of-the-art food processing company in the Central Valley, California. And this team was working out of a tiny farmhouse. The reason I know about it, I was there. I was the financial controller of Morningstar at the time. And most of our team were technicians. They were mechanics, electricians, automation specialists, quality specialists, etc. And we were working very, very hard. We were working 100-hour weeks, basically, trying to get this project off the ground. And one day, our founder walked into the farmhouse and said, I'd like to call a meeting and talk about governance. I'd like to talk about how to organize this company. I have some ideas that I think are interesting I want to share with you. So we met with him that night in a little construction trailer out on the job site. We had little steel folding chairs in a circle. And we sat around and he passed around a document called the Morningstar Colleague Principles. And they basically boil down to two. And the first principle was that human beings should not use force or coercion against other human beings. And when you think about that principle, it's the foundation of all law everywhere in the world. So every law against assault and battery, kidnapping and murder, theft and burglary, and all the rest is predicated on the principle that people shouldn't use force against other people. The second principle was that people should honor the commitments they make to each other. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. Or you renegotiate the commitment. This is also a principle of law everywhere in the world. Contract law would be meaningless but for the principle of keeping your commitments to other parties. And we thought about this, we discussed these principles, debated them, and we came to realize that these are really important principles. And the reason we know this is if you imagine a world where everyone aligned their behavior with these principles, you wouldn't need armies or navies or security guards or locks on your door or police. We know that's not reality. We understand that's not reality. But that's not the point. The point is, the closer we adhere to these principles, the better off we are as human beings. The more happiness, the more harmony, the more prosperity we experience in our human journey. So we talked about these ideas for a couple of hours. At the end of the evening, we all looked at each other and said, we can't really think of any reasons to argue against these. And so we adopted them as the governance of the enterprise. And we walked out into the night air, and we were a self-managed organization. So this was March of 1990. We had a lot of work to do. We had vital equipment arriving on ocean cargo freighters from Italy. We had to hire hundreds of people to drive the trucks and operate the factory. We had thousands of acres of tomatoes coming up out of the ground, up and down the state of California. We had hundreds of contractors on the job site, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, fabricating, constructing, welding, building. And finally, on July 16th, we threw the switch, and we made 90 million pounds of industrial tomato paste for the world market, and we changed the cost structure of an entire industry. And we did it all without a single human boss. The entire governance of the enterprise was boiled down to two core principles. We think these principles are the most fundamental principles of human interaction. They are to human interaction what gravity is to physics. Whenever two people are interacting, these principles are operational, always. It doesn't matter whether you recognize them, whether you discern them, whether you believe in them, or whether you can describe them with language. It doesn't matter. They're always operational. And so the company went on to grow. We established operations up and down the supply chain toward our customers in remote warehouses across North America, and toward the supply chain in terms of harvesting, trucking, transplanting, and farming. We added another factory and then another factory. We became the largest tomato processor in the world. And I believe all of you and everyone in North America has eaten our product because it goes into everything you can think of in the grocery store, from ketchup to salsa, pizza sauce, barbecue sauce, spaghetti sauce, fish sauce, Bloody Mary mix, and Campbell's soup, and a myriad other products. We export worldwide. We've been doing this now for 28 years, since 1990, and we've never had a single human boss. Is this possible? Can this possibly work? Well, in 2010, Gary Hamel came out and spent a day with us, and then he wrote about us in the Harvard Business Review, where the cover story described as the world's most creatively managed company. The article was titled, "First, Let's Fire All the Managers." We think that's not quite the right title, but that's what they wanted because I guess it's catchy. We founded the Morningstar Self-Management Institute in 2008 to promote the principles and practices of self-management for anyone that's interested anywhere in the world. And basically, we found that people were interested. They wanted to know more, especially now that the company is over 4,000 seasonal colleagues and over 400 year-round full-time colleagues. So how does all this work? Well, the first thing is it's principle-centered. It's based on two very simple principles. And I met some people earlier from Visa. Dee Hock, the founder of Visa, said that simple rules allow for complex, intelligent behavior. And complex rules cause simple, stupid behavior. So we believe that these two core principles, acting as the guide to behavior and action and strategy and process execution and everything else that takes place inside the enterprise, are fundamental to a success. Self-management recognizes that human beings are the ultimate reality. Organizations are concepts. Teams are concepts. Companies are concepts. Human beings are real. Only human beings can act, and only human beings can make decisions. Human beings are the ultimate reality. Everything revolves around individuals. And we recognize that there are powerful technological and social drivers that are causing this movement. So, yeah, we look at the internet as a disruptive force that causes us to act at the speed of light with information flowing at us from all directions. But if you look at what's coming in technology, many people think it's going to be much more disruptive than the internet itself. You look at things like blockchain, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, nanotechnology, robotics, genetic engineering, and how all these things are converging together. The disruptors, the Ubers, the Lyfts, the Airbnbs of the world are about to be disrupted themselves. Technology is making archaic command and control, 19th century industrial management practices, as we saw on the slide earlier today, obsolete. You just can't keep up. The social drivers are powerful as well. If we look at the investment banking industry, there was a great article in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year. It's being completely disrupted by generations Y and Z. The old model had young recruits working for years on end, doing trivial work, waiting for a chance at a big investment banking deal. Those days are gone. Generations Y and Z are not going to wait years on end doing trivial work, waiting for a big deal. They want to work for purpose and meaning. And they will not stay more than 12 to 18 months. They don't get a chance to have some purpose and meaning in their lives at work. So we need to think about different ways of organizing. Self-management's about managing great complexity with great simplicity. If you can boil the governance of an enterprise down to two simple principles, it's just like a fern based on two bent lines. It allows you to do extraordinarily complex things with great simplicity. I've had people tell me, well, you aren't that complex at Morningstar. You're just smashing tomatoes. What's the big deal? And I kind of slap my forehead and go, well, wait a second. You know, we have PhDs that are studying thermodynamics and genetic engineering and cell biology and lots of other disciplines that are hard to pronounce. I think we do more than just smash tomatoes. I think we're pretty complex. And then there's the matter of economics. And this is a very powerful driver. So Gary Hamel writes powerfully about what he calls the management tax. That's the economic burden of bureaucracy and hierarchy. And it's huge. He's issued his $3 trillion challenge to U.S. business. He thinks we could wring, if we wanted to, $3 trillion of savings out of the U.S. economy if we just cut the cost of bureaucracy. How does this work? Well, if we look at a typical company, the average span of management control, as they call it, is about 1 to 10. Usually means for every 10 workers, there's a manager. And usually the manager is paid more than the workers that he or she is managing. So if we take a simple startup, and we have 10 workers making $30,000 a year, They probably have a manager making $90,000 a year. Well, guess what? All of those 10 workers are already managers in their own personal lives. They're all making life-changing decisions every day for their own personal lives. Planning, organizing, controlling, selecting, coordinating, all the functions of management. They're deciding who to date, who to marry, where to live, what to do for a living, where to go to college, whether to buy a house, whether to buy a car, whether to have children. Gigantic, life-changing decisions without a boss. And somehow, when they walk into the workplace, they can't do anything unless they have a boss. We can infuse professional management skills into each of these 10 workers, give them all a $5,000 a year raise, and we don't need the $90,000 a year manager at all. Or we can redeploy that person to do something productive instead of supervising other people. Let's say this little startup grows by a factor of 10, so we have 100 workers. Well, a span of control 1 to 10, that means we need 10 managers. But now the managers need a manager. That person probably needs to make $200,000 a year. We can infuse professional management skills in each one of those 100 workers, give them all a $5,000 a year raise. We don't need the 10 managers, and we don't need the manager of the 10 managers. And we've just saved ourselves $600,000 a year, every year. You push that out over 10 years, and net present value is $3.5 million. All things being equal, if this company is competing with a similar company, who's going to win? The economics of eliminating the management tax are compelling, and they're huge. They can't be ignored. Here's a company that I'm sure you have not heard of, but I believe you will very soon. Freshville is a startup, and let's do a thought experiment. Let's imagine, what if instead of walking into a convenience store and seeing chewing tobacco, lottery tickets, beef jerky, stale donuts, and warm coffee, you saw a beautiful natural juice bar, a kiosk with fresh fruit and vegetable snacks, a craft beer cave, an internet app-only drive-through window, a beautiful high-end premium coffee kiosk. Freshville is about to massively disrupt the convenience store industry in California. So if you drive to Yosemite in January, starting in January, you'll see their first store on Highway 152 in Los Banos. And they are looking to expand rapidly and massively disrupt. They are not going to have managers in their stores. Their associates are going to be self-managers. We just had a job fair with them last week. And it was quite interesting to hear the job candidates talk about how they were excited to work at Freshville because they did not want to be micromanaged anymore in the workplace. They want to be free to do their best work. They will be paid more than people in other convenience stores because they will be performing the functions of management. They're self-managers. So there's some concepts that are really hard for some people to get their heads around sometimes. And the first one is this idea of zero command authority. Zero command authority means zero. I mean, if you literally do not have the ability to tell other people what to do, that's very challenging for some people, especially people that have been traditional managers. When you can't use force, you can't tell other people what to do. You can't walk up to a person and say, stop doing X and start doing Y. You can't walk up to a person and unilaterally terminate their employment. Those options do not exist. This is really hard for some traditional managers to understand and accept. Command authority causes leadership muscles to atrophy. When you have to interact with people and prompt action through other people using trust, respect, and communication, that makes you a stronger leader. Command authority erodes leadership. That's a hard one. Some people don't want to give up power. We talk about in self-management power, not empowerment. Traditional empowerment programs are a little bit challenging. And basically, they involve one person with power lending his or her power to a subordinate who has less power. There's a really big problem with that. And that is that what you lend can be repossessed at any time. And that often happens. Self-management is beyond empowerment. Self-management is power itself. Because everyone in this ecosystem is free from coercion and force and is trusted and respected to the degree they honor the commitments they make to each other. In a self-managed environment, commitments are paramount. Commitments are crucial. They are incredibly important. There's a great researcher, Fernando Flores. He was Chile's first finance minister at the age of 29 in the 1970s. His boss, Salvador Allende, was overthrown in a bloody coup, and Fernando spent 3 years in jail and doing nothing but reading books and studying computers and language. And he created the idea of commitments as speech acts. They're much more than just talk. Commitments are affirmative acts of declaration of intent to other people. And they involve a request, a negotiation, defining conditions of satisfaction, performance, and acceptance. There's structure, there's a life cycle. Commitments are alive. True commitments. The problem in many companies, if not most companies, is that people are sloppy about the way they make and keep commitments. It's a problem. But it's a problem that can be solved. It can be overcome. There is software that's being used today based on Fernando's philosophy, where companies are able to track commitments in their environment and create a heat map and see which commitments are on track and which aren't. It's an incredibly powerful tool for keeping things on track. And it's the second principle of self-management. And the way we instantiate this is we develop contracts or agreements between peers. If you are in a self-managed environment, you don't have a boss, a human boss, walking around telling you if you're doing a good job or not. You have to be able to tell yourself, and you have to be able to tell each other as peers, each of whom has an equal voice. So in a peer agreement, in self-management, we identify the why. Why are you here? We ask everyone to craft a personal mission statement. Why are you here? Why do you show up for work every day? What does excellence look like in your particular role in this organization? And how does what you do support the overall mission of the enterprise? And if you need like a month to figure out what your mission is in a way that resonates with you personally and with your fellow colleagues, that's fine. Take all the time you need. We want you to understand the why. Why are you here? The other element of the peer agreement is the what. What do you do when you're here? What are the processes for which you agree to be held fully accountable? The nice thing about self-management is there's no place to hide. If a process is going well, and you're the person who owns the process by agreement with your peers, you're the person who will be asked about it. The same if it's not going well. There's literally full accountability. So identify what processes you're responsible for. It's also very important to know what decisions you're responsible for as an individual. So we call these decision rights. So with respect to each process, are you the decision maker? Are you merely making recommendations to another decision maker for a given process, or are you making decisions when the regular decision maker goes on vacation? Or are you the decision maker but require input from others prior to making the decision? We want to know. It's important. It creates clarity. It's about defining clarity, accountability, and transparency. And then we want to know, how are you going to know if you're doing a good job? For a given process, what are the measures? We look at KPIs. At Morningstar, they're called stepping stones because they're considered stepping stones toward perfection. They don't benchmark against other sectors or other businesses or other industries. They benchmark against perfection. So perfection in an efficiency metric is 100%. Perfection for a cost metric is 0. And then they try to look at trend lines over time, express these as two-dimensional line graphs, time series line graphs, so we see what the trends are, and focus on the trends. If the trends are bending downward, then we hope that triggers conversations among peers on how to help each other turn the trend line around. We try to publish these transparently so everybody can see what's going on all the time. But they're KPIs, they're not KPTs, they're not key performance truths, they're indicators. So we look at the indicators as a way to trigger conversations to search deeper in order to find out what the truth is of any given situation. And then these peer agreements are executed, they're contracts, so people sign them with fellow colleagues in the environment. And on average, they assign these agreements with 7, 8, 9, 10 fellow colleagues. And why is that? Well, that's what's manageable. Those are the people with whom people work most often, and generally on the same team. And it makes sense. And it drives lots of accountability. Who's more likely to spot an issue, a problem, a threat, or an opportunity in the workplace? A boss who wanders through a work area a few times a day, or peers who are working side by side with their fellow colleagues all day long and feel fully empowered to speak up and raise issues as they arise? We think it's the peers. So this is what lots of organizations look like that have agile shops. They're doing all kinds of cool things in the agile world, and then they're suffocated by a bureaucracy on top that's constantly interfering and telling people what to do and directing and interfering, etc. So in a self-managed environment, everything looks like the bottom. There is no hierarchy org chart whatsoever. And I'll show you the actual Morningstar dynamic here in a second. We think self-management is quite congruent with Agile. This is a very cursory look at Agile and self-management. Again, it's all about simplicity. You can manage a nearly $1 billion enterprise with 2 core principles, like a fern. That seems to align quite well with the idea of simplicity in Agile. Face-to-face communication. In self-management, everything is about direct communication. So, I don't know if you've heard of this company, but I was just here about a month ago. Hire Group, we can turn to the east, to China, Qingdao, China, to look for examples of self-management. Hire is the largest appliance manufacturer in the world. Until recently, they had 80,000 employees, but they recently laid off 10,000 middle managers, so now they're down to about 70,000 employees. They just purchased GE Appliances in Louisville, Kentucky. They have a very visionary CEO named Zhang Ruimin, and he took over a defunct state-owned manufacturer in 1986, I believe, and the quality was so bad on the refrigerators they were making that he took the remaining inventory of, I think, 76 refrigerators out in the parking lot, and he had the employees smash them with sledgehammers in order to demonstrate his commitment to quality. So he certainly turned the company around. And he has now created 4,000, out of his 70,000 person workforce, he's created nearly 4,000 self-managed teams. And these self-managed teams, for the most part, are multidisciplinary, include people involved in sales and product development and research and production, etc. And he's declared that everyone in the company is what he calls a maker, and he wants zero distance to the customer. And his appliances and televisions, washers and dryers, refrigerators, stoves, all this equipment is equipped with internet connectivity. And it's sending out massive reams of big data to their data centers every day so they can see how people are using their appliances. And when a maker, who could be anybody in the company, spots an opportunity to develop a new product or service, they can create a business plan and get it approved and create a new product or service. Innovation can spring forth from anywhere at any time. And now they've got about 50 micro-enterprises, they call them, MEs. And those micro-enterprises can spin off and seek outside venture capital and develop into entirely new businesses. So if you Google Thunder Robot, you'll see that they're now in online gaming. It's an incredible, incredible company. And zero distance to the customer, self-managed teams, 70,000 people, world's largest. Statoil is the largest company in Norway. They've thrown out traditional budgeting. So we'll look to the north at Statoil. They've gotten rid of the annual budget cycle. Budgets are dynamic. Applications for resources are dynamic resource planning. So they've absolutely figured out how to extricate themselves from the annual command and control budget cycle and create a very dynamic, robust ecosystem where people are free to request resources and act on ideas and innovations at any time, whenever it makes sense. Event-driven, not calendar-driven. Extremely powerful case study. If we go south to Brazil, you may have heard of Ricardo Semler. Ricardo Semler wrote the book Maverick, which was a bestseller in the US several years ago. And he took his company into radical self-management. He grew his company from $4 million in the early 80s to about $200 million US in the early 2000s. People select their own salaries at Semco. It's amazing. People go up to a kiosk and, punch in. I forget if it's once or twice a year, they punch in what they think their salary should be on their next paycheck. And it's within a range, so it's not crazy. And it's transparent. So it's about radical transparency or radical self-management. And it makes sense. It works for them. Let's hit the movie here. This is Morningstar's org chart. We digitized our colleague letters of understanding, our peer agreements, for our first factory. And it's dynamic. It responds to opportunities and threats and needs as they arise. It's completely dynamic. It's shape-shifting all the time. It's like a spider web. Spider silk is 5 times stronger than steel by weight. If a person leaves, doesn't matter. Other people rapidly fill in the roles and responsibilities. It just doesn't matter. I think I'm the turquoise dot in the upper left there. Constantly moving, constantly adjusting. I think everyone has an average of 6 to 7 colleague connections, people they're connected with by agreement. Allows us to address issues rapidly and effectively.
What is the size of the dot?
The number of connections. Yeah. So there are lots of roads up the mountain. This is my periodic table of the future of work. I talked about self-management today, but there's holacracy, teleocracy, sociocracy, democracy, podularity, hierarchy, wiki management, lattice management, self-management, and lots of others. Many roads up the mountain. Feel free to check it out, dive into it, and have fun and geek out if you wish. So I'll just end with a question. If a sprawling, noisy, dusty, dirty agribusiness can figure out how to organize the way I just showed you with our little 1-minute org chart movie, or if a convenience store can figure out how to run without managers, where everyone is a manager, why would any tech company or startup want to organize based on 19th century management principles? Thank you very much.